Deep in the frostbitten north, the sun rose over a small Viking settlement perched on the rocky shoreline. At first glance, everything seemed ordinary: wooden huts with thatched roofs, the odor of salted fish drifting through the crisp air, and a row of longboats bobbing in the icy waters. However, behind one particular hut, a fascinating and distinctly un-Viking endeavor had begun. The settlement's fiercest warriors had traded their axes for whisks and their shields for beaking trays. It all started when Olaf the Ferocious, who, truth be told, was more like Olaf the somewhat grumpy, found himself in dire need of silver to repair the clan's largest and proudest longboat. The crew had returned from a recent raid only to discover that the hull of the beloved vessel was riddled with holes, courtesy of a particularly nasty run-in with the rocky coast. The local shipwright demanded an impressive sum of money for the essential repairs. Without coin, the next expedition to foreign lands would be nothing but a very cold waiting game in the settlement. In a moment of uncharacteristic inspiration, Olaf proposed a side gig. "We shall raise silver by selling cupcakes," he declared, slamming his empty mug of mead onto a rickety wooden table. Several Vikings nearly choked on their thick stew at the suggestion. Cupcakes? From Vikings? More than a few eyebrows shot skyward. But after some debate, the clan recognized two truths. First, people paid good money for sweet treats, and second, Olaf's roaring pronouncement discouraged immediate disagreement. Ever the loyal companion, Ingvar the Earnest volunteered to be the chief assistant. He was a large fellow with a beard so long and braided that children often used the ends as jump ropes. Despite his fearsome appearance, Ingvar was known for his insatiable sweet tooth. He had once devoured an entire tray of pastries intended for the local lord. Olaf never forgot that fiasco, and if anyone could sense the potential in a sugary enterprise, it was Ingvar. The clan quickly assembled to discuss the next steps, though confusion abounded. What was a cupcake, exactly? Helga the hawk-eyed scratched her head. "Are they perchance miniature versions of bread loaves?" she asked. "Tiny loaves for the tiny trolls in yonder caves." She spoke so solemnly that some younger Vikings actually peered at her in alarm, as if anticipating goblins materializing out of the ground. Tolkien the Wise? No. Not related to that other Tolkien, but named so because he once tried to record the clan's sagas in a series of meticulously drawn runes, came forward with a dusty scroll. He unrolled it to display a diagram of what looked like small, fluffy cakes topped with swirls of icing. "Aha," Olaf said, studying the scroll. "So they're like cakes, only smaller. That's perfect. People like cute food, so the local villagers may be more inclined to buy them. Plus, we can charge extra for the artistry." He paused. "But we must ensure they taste good." To accomplish this formidable task, the Vikings needed flour, sugar, butter, and most importantly, the secret weapon of any self-respecting baker: eggs. Helga volunteered her brood of hens. She returned moments later carrying a large wicker basket filled with eggs, each a potential treasure for the clan's new enterprise. The challenge after that was to figure out how to actually bake these cakes. Draker stoves and Viking hearths were excellent for roasting entire boars, but less so for delicate confections. Ingvar cleared his throat. "I think we can set up a makeshift oven if we stack some stones in the corner of the hall. Then we can light the fire and cover it with a metal plate, throw in a few skulls for good measure." Just kidding. A collective sigh of relief passed through the group, as the more zealous among them might have taken that literally. While it added an air of terrifying authenticity to a Viking venture, bones probably wouldn't help the flavor. The next morning, construction of the temporary cupcake hearth began. The entire clan huddled indoors, piling stones in a careful semicircle. Blacksmiths hammered out large metal trays. Younger Vikings fanned the flames, their cheeks rosy with effort, while older, more experienced sailors tried to gauge the correct temperature using the time-honored method of sticking a hand near the fire until it starts to hurt, but not too much. Soon enough, a rudimentary but seemingly functional baking station was set. The clan looked upon it with pride and a dash of skepticism. "Now for the dough," Olaf proclaimed. He had borrowed a battered mixing bowl from a farmer's wife, who'd been more than happy to part with it so long as the clan promised her a share of cupcakes. Olaf wasn't entirely sure how to combine flour, sugar, butter, and eggs, so the group used the most logical approach. Each Viking took a turn dumping something into the bowl and swirling it around violently. Clouds of flour rose in the air. Ingvar sneezed uncontrollably, dusting the entire hall with a sugary haze. Helga tried to add a pinch of salt but ended up throwing in a fistful. All the sober said absolutely nothing but tried to keep track with a small piece of charcoal and a bit of bark, eventually giving up once the swirling turned into an impromptu melee of elbow jabs. Finally, someone declared the batter finished. It was thick and lumpy, resembling porridge gone wrong. Despite misgivings, they spooned it into crude wooden cups that had been carved out for the purpose. Into the cupcake hearth the cups went, where the lumps were met with intense heat and prayers to the gods. The Vikings then stood in a circle, arms folded, occasionally peeking into the oven with the same reverence they might show a sacred relic. 10 minutes or so, the scroll says, Tolkien the Wise muttered, marking the time in runes on a piece of plank. The clan did their best to wait patiently, though it quickly became clear that waiting patiently was not a universal Viking trait. Helga paced back and forth, biting her nails. Ingvar performed a vigorous series of squats to keep himself from opening the oven prematurely. Olaf tried his best to set an example of calm, but he spent most of his time checking to make sure the roofing above them wasn't about to catch fire. When the moment arrived, they opened the makeshift oven door and beheld the first batch of Viking cupcakes. Baked lumps, small holes pockmarking the tops, but they seemed mostly edible. Olaf tentatively took one, handed it around for a sniff. To everyone's surprise, it didn't smell like scorched fish or burning seaweed. It smelled like cake. "Taste it," someone said. They all stared at Olaf, expecting their leader to volunteer. He pretended not to notice, rubbing his chin. But as the silence grew tense, Helga snatched the first cupcake, took a bold bite, and paused. The clan held its collective breath. A grin split Helga's face. "It's not terrible," she declared, her mouth full of crumbly sweetness. That was all the encouragement they needed. Ingvar grabbed 3. Ulf calmly ate one, declared it less disgusting than he feared, and reached for another. A raucous chorus of chewing erupted. The Vikings' mighty warriors of sea and land devoured cupcakes until the entire batch disappeared. They decided they could sell these lumps to customers, but realized their cupcakes lacked decoration. According to the scroll, the swirl of frosting atop each cake was essential. It made the product more visually appealing and justified a higher price. So the clan set out to create icing. That's when the real trouble began. Icing required a precise balance of sugar and butter whipped into a fluffy cloud. Vikings, by nature, were not known for gentle, cloud-like anything. Their attempts at whipping spanned from methodical stirring with a wooden spoon to beating lumps of frosting with a small hammer. The result varied from rock-hard lumps to runny glop. Helga refused to give up. She took the initiative, ordering Ingvar to keep stirring while she sprinkled in sugar. She whipped the mixture at a surprising speed, occasionally yelling for Ingvar to add more butter or a few drops of goat's milk. Finally, after much sweat and a small avalanche of sugar that left them all coated in a sweet dusting, they achieved a fluffy concoction that actually resembled frosting. Taste tests ensued again, and the clan grew more confident. Next came the part Olaf dreaded: decoration. They tried swirling the icing on the cupcake tops using spoons. Ingvar used his large, battle-scarred thumbs at one point, creating an imprint that resembled a bear's paw. The effect was borderline comedic, but still passable. Tolkien suggested adding dried fruit or sprinkles of colored sugar to liven up the appearance. Unfortunately, the local grocer only had a limited supply of dried berries, so the Vikings ended up meticulously cutting them into tiny shapes, hearts, runes, and even small axes. The cupcakes, once assembled, were far more charming than any warrior dared to admit aloud. Confident they had a marketable product, Olaf ordered the clan to set up shop. They commandeered a modest stall near the settlement's entrance, right by the main road. A hand-painted sign reading "Cupcakes Buy" or "Be Conquered" was erected. In front, tablecloth-laden boards displayed the curious confections. The clan's younger recruits, eager to hone their fearsome presence, were posted as bouncers, though their main job was to beckon passersby to try the cupcakes, or else. The settlement's residents, alarmed yet intrigued, initially approached with caution. Some recognized the usual raiders and pillagers manning the stall, brandishing piping bags instead of swords. But after a few freebies, scaled-down cupcakes they playfully called practice lumps, villagers flocked to the stand in droves. It turned out that Vikings, with their hearty approach, had produced a decidedly robust dessert that suited the taste buds of a population used to harsh living conditions. The cupcakes were filling, sweet, and surprisingly enjoyable. Still, a Viking cafeteria is never short on mishaps. One day, an overzealous warrior named Bjorn the Boisterous grew too enthusiastic about drumming up business. He roared his unstoppable sales pitch at a gaggle of passing farmers. "Buy these, or else we raid your fields." The farmers immediately parted with their coins out of sheer terror. While profitable, this approach caused a brief scolding from Olaf. "We need recurring customers," the leader groused. "We can't scare them away permanently." Under Olaf's watchful eye, the clan toned down the threats, just a tad, and focused on charming customers with special limited-time offers like, "Buy 4 cupcakes, get a 5th one thrown at you for free." The comedic nature of it, combined with the Vikings' improbable sincerity, soon built a loyal following. Before long, the clan's coin chest began to fill with silver, copper, trinkets, and even a few precious gems from travelers who felt compelled to trade them for a dozen frosted lumps. Amid this success, word spread to neighboring villages. Curious merchants visited the stall. Their eyes widened at the sight of these fearsome warriors hawking pink frosted delights. Several traveling bards composed songs about the sweet oddity, each verse more exaggerated than the last. "Odin's brood now serves me cake, a frosting swirl for coin they take. Row men row, in sugar's thrall. All hail the horde behind that stall." Naturally, the Vikings loved the publicity. They even let the bards eat day-old cupcakes at a discount if they agreed to keep singing their praises. The settlement bustled with activity, and the coin chest grew heavier. Focused as they were on the new enterprise, the clan almost forgot the messy reality of running a bakery. They needed more ingredients than they ever imagined. They found themselves ordering shipments of flour from the south, hunting for sugar in foreign markets, and bargaining with local farms for enough eggs to meet the constant demand. Their hearth ovens kept scorching traditionally roasted dinners because they were overrun with trays of cupcakes. And the cleanup? Endless. Stacks of sticky bowls, lumps of half-dried icing stuck to every surface, and flour footprints trailing through the great hall. Needless to say, it didn't exactly smell like a pine forest in there anymore. Amid the chaos, a new star emerged, Ragnar the Red, so named for his shock of auburn hair. He discovered an uncanny knack for pairing flavors. He suggested adding a hint of spice like nutmeg or cinnamon, giving the cupcakes an exotic flair. Then he started experimenting with glazes, drizzling honey laced with local herbs. The result was a sensation. Customers in line began bickering over who got the last honey-drizzled treat. Even the clan members, usually indifferent to subtle spice differences, appreciated his innovations. He also proposed a signature cupcake, the Dragon's Claw, topped with spikes of candied sugar and a hidden molten strawberry jam center. "It will remind everyone of the fiery voyages we take," he explained, brandishing a sugar-coated spatula as though it were a sword. Helga, intrigued, helped him perfect the jam's texture, adjusting the sweetness until it had the perfect tang. Once unleashed to the public, the Dragon's Claw cupcake became a runaway success. The bakery, however, was still a temporary venture. Olaf never lost sight of the ultimate goal: funding the next voyage. With the coin chest steadily growing, talk of the final repairs to the longboat grew more frequent. Day by day, the clan grew richer, though that also bred mischief. A few warriors, flush with silver, started making outlandish purchases. Exotic pets, extremely shiny helmets, or expensive fur cloaks dyed bright purple. The sight of a Viking strolling about in a plum-colored cloak, nibbling a cupcake, raised eyebrows among the more traditional members of the group. When Olaf learned how some of his warriors were squandering money, he grew furious. "And we didn't slave over these ovens to waste coin on frivolities," he roared, slamming a tray of half-iced cupcakes onto a table. "Every piece of silver counts. Our journeys require sails, supplies, and maybe even improvements for our ship, like a sturdier hull that might oppose sharp rocks next time." Shamed, but not subdued, several reckless Vikings grudgingly returned their gaudier purchases for partial refunds. Ingvar parted with a monstrous feathered hat that resembled the tail feathers of 5 exotic birds glued together. Surtur the Stoic traded in his flashy pair of diamond-studded boot buckles for the more modest and infinitely more sensible iron ones. Gradually, the clan refocused on the dream of the open seas and the promise of new lands to discover. At last, the day came when the coin chest was brimming. They had enough to repair the hull, restock provisions, and maybe even commission a fresh sail emblazoned with the clan's fearsome serpent emblem. Olaf gathered everyone in the longhouse to make the announcement. Vikings of all ranks sat on benches, many fidgeting with residual lumps of dough under their nails. Some had flour stains on their garments, while others sported icing in their beards. "We now have the silver," he began, voice echoing against the wooden beams. "The next voyage is within our grasp. We set sail in 2 weeks' time, once the repairs are finished. And as for our bakery, our sweet Conquest, it shall close its doors." A hush fell over the crowd. Their hearts lifted at the news of returning to the open sea, but a strange pain crept in. Despite lumps, mishaps, and the daily sugar-coated fiascos, they had grown oddly fond of their little cupcake enterprise. Helga coughed into her hand. "Must we shut it down entirely? It's become surprisingly enjoyable." Olaf hesitated. He scratched at his beard, sending tiny frosting flakes fluttering to the ground. He admitted he too had grown accustomed to hearing happy chatter at the stall, feeling the satisfaction of turning flour and butter into little pieces of joy. But they were Vikings raiders, explorers. "We can keep our recipes," he said gently. "Perhaps, when we return from our voyage, we can open again. After all, it's not often you see a Viking clan that can both conquer seas and sweeten tongues." Relief rippled through the group. They agreed they would shut down temporarily, but not forever. News of the impending closure spread quickly. The final day of operation arrived, and a large crowd of villagers and travelers gathered with bittersweet anticipation. The Vikings rolled out their most elaborate cupcakes yet, extra frosting, swirling designs, bright colors from local berries, and of course, the famed dragon's claw. Bards sang, children danced, and even a few local dignitaries came to sample the final offerings. The clan sold out of cupcakes well before dusk. Their coin chest overflowed. With hearty farewells, they promised to return one day, brandishing new stories of discovery, heroism, and improbable baking success. One by one, the Vikings closed the stall's shutters, cleaned up the serving boards, and extinguished the battered torches. They hoisted the coin chest back to the great hall, where they spent the rest of the night feasting on leftover batter and mead. Early the next morning, the entire settlement heard the clang of hammers as the local shipwright began repairs on the mighty vessel. Over the course of the following week, boards were replaced, the keel reinforced, and the prow recarved into an even more terrifying dragon's shape. With the funds from their cupcake trade, they hired extra hands to ensure every rivet was properly secured. Ingvar found some satisfaction in personally overseeing the installation of a new, sturdy sail, boasting the clan's emblem. Every so often, he'd take out a leftover cupcake from his belt pouch, nobody was quite sure how it stayed intact, and nibble on it, reminiscing about the unexpected journey into confectionery. When the day of departure arrived, the re-outfitted longboat cut a proud figure on the water. Clanspeople and neighboring villagers lined the shore to watch the Vikings off. Many in the crowd still had traces of frosting at the corners of their mouths, courtesy of the final baking spree. The Vikings loaded the boat with provisions. Barrels of salted fish, fresh water, spare sails, weapons. and naturally, a small crate of the last cupcakes, reserved for the early days at sea. Olaf stood at the prow, scanning the horizon, inhaling the salt-tinged breeze. His mind churned with excitement. This was his domain, his passion. Yet he couldn't help but smile when he recalled the swirl of frosting on top of a well-crafted cupcake. If times grew tough on the ocean, he would remember how they overcame the challenge of an unfamiliar craft. If a new land refused to trade or threatened them, he'd recall the sweet diplomacy of a shared treat. Who knew? Perhaps they'd find foreign markets hungry for Viking-made confections, opening up exotic lines of pastry trade. With a booming call, Olaf signaled his rowers. The oars dove into the water. Helga and Ingnar took up positions near the mast, while Ragnar double-checked the cargo, ensuring his jar of exotic spices was well protected. The crowd cheered from the shore. One bold villager asked if they would bring back new cupcake recipes from distant lands. Olaf laughed heartily and promised that if they discovered any secret delicacies along the way, the clan would absolutely seize the opportunity, culinarily and otherwise. The ship glided out of the harbor, battered in the past but now fully renewed. Weighed down by enough coin to signal their success, the Vikings embarked on their next grand adventure, hearts full of anticipation. Gone were the days of measuring spoons and icing catastrophes, replaced once more by the crash of waves and the thrill of unknown horizons. But each Viking carried a bit of that sweet memory with them. They had proven that they could adapt, conquer, and even offer a small portion of delight to those around them, all with a bit of flour and sugar. The clan sailed relentlessly into the open sea, the wind filling their new sail. Conversations drifted across the deck about which direction they should explore first. Some suggested heading north for rumored treasures, others favored venturing south, enticed by tales of exotic fruits that might make novel cupcake flavors. For the moment, no decision could be made. They would navigate as Vikings always did, ready for any opportunity that might come their way. As the shore vanished behind them, a hush fell on the crew. Ingvar tightened the knot in his majestic beard. Helga checked that her bow and quiver were securely fastened. Olaf closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the sunlight on his rugged face, listening to the creak of the timbers beneath his feet. Then, as one, the rowers pulled in sync, propelling the longboat forward. The water sprayed against the prow, droplets glistening in the early light. Eventually, the lines of the settlement faded entirely, merging with the skyline. The open horizon beckoned. That edge of the world where adventure lay was as enticing as the swirling icing on a fresh cupcake. It was a new beginning, one paved by pillaging in the past, but funded this time by the sweet artistry of the present. Perhaps in time they would do both, brandish swords and cupcake trays, forging a fearsome name across the seas, a name that spread not just terror, but a lingering taste of sugar and warmth. And though they had set aside their piping bags for now, the memory of making sweets lingered like the last grain of sugar at the bottom of a cup. The clan realized that this venture had taught them something about perseverance, creativity, and the power of a well-timed handheld treat. Even Vikings, with all their muscular might and mead-soaked bravado, could benefit from the simple joys of baking. Such simple acts might someday open gates that brute force alone could never breach. Far from their settlement's shores, the Vikings sailed on, hearts abuzz with the same mixture of determination and delight that had fueled their cupcake conquest. Their minds traveled even further. They wondered about the lands they would find, the people they would meet, and the possibilities awaiting them, culinary or otherwise. They had proven they weren't just marauders. They were explorers of all kinds, of seas and recipes, of battles and batter, of conquest and collaboration. Should a foreign ruler demand tribute someday, perhaps the clan would still raid, but they also might bring a few trays of those famed frosted treats, forging alliances with a well-placed swirl of icing. The possibilities were as boundless as the horizon. And as the Vikings rolled over each wave, spears at the ready and memories of laughter trailing behind, they carried their newfound wisdom with them, an unlikely blend of savage might and sweet compassion, ready to conquer the next land with a sword in one hand and a cupcake in the other.